This is the story of a civilization with all the tools to be peaceful and harmonious, to create a world where all beings are treated with respect and kindness, where all beings can thrive and enjoy the miracle of being alive. But who instead have created hell on earth for numerous beings, who have created a society filled with inequality, injustice, discrimination, suffering, disease, poverty, warfare, and who with full knowledge are destroying our one and only planet.
If you look at any problem in the world right now, anyone, nationalism, racism, sexism, any ism in the world is basically the product of separation and supremacy.
And the subtext of every meal also is that certain beings are superior and others are inferior. So there's this basic sense of entitlement, a basic sense of might makes right. Those who are strong can use and abuse and exploit those who are less powerful. And so when we see injustice like racism and sexism and ableism and heterosexism and human trafficking and classism and all the ways that we human beings have found to exploit each other, to oppress each other, to use each other, abuse each other. Underneath that is this constant and ongoing violence towards animals for food and other products, where we abuse them in the same way and have this same attitude of superiority, the same attitude of disconnectedness, the same attitude of reductionism, of reducing them to commodities that don't have feelings. We don't sympathize with them. We learn essentially to harden our hearts.
My mother grew up on a farm, and so she was pretty hardened about animals because she grew up on a dairy farm and she had a pet calf probably about the same age as Lucas. And she loved him, and one day she went to school and she came home and her brothers and father were beating him onto a truck and hitting him and taking his tail and twisting it. And she said, "What are you doing? Stop, don't hurt Georgie." And they said, you can't have a cow as a pet. He's an animal and we're gonna eat him. And so they took him and slaughtered him and then served him for dinner. When I first came to her as a child and somebody told me that meat was animals, and I said, I don't want to eat that anymore. I was maybe like 6 years old, and she got really angry and she said, you have to eat it. That's what we're gonna have here, and you're not gonna not eat that. And so I kind of just like repressed that for many years, and then when I became older, obviously started meeting more animals. I always loved animals, but I was one of those people who loved animals and still ate them.
There's nothing natural about eating meat. When I was in Korea, people thought it was natural to eat dogs. It's all culturally determined. We are products of our communities.
There's not really any rational basis for discriminating between a cow or a cat or a dog. It's just cultural norms that have caused us to do that. The point being that the kinds of animals that here, for instance, that we raise in intensive confinement, out of view, and then put on our plates, are no less sentient or worthy of living and worthy of respect than animals who we cherish as household pets.
We're trading everything that is most important to animals against something that is almost mind-numbingly inconsequential for humans. And we're saying that the human momentary pleasure outweighs the heretical cruelty and exploitation and killing of animals.
A just society has to include everyone. And as the philosophers have shown, those who must be included is anyone who is affected by the behaviors, by the choices. So it would be all sentient beings. And without that, you can't have a just society.
I talked to the folks who were in my life, and they just were like, okay, but people are getting shot in the streets, and we're dealing with police brutality and discrimination and the prison system and all of this, and you're talking about animals?
A lot of people in the industry want to be able to say, well, that's just one bad apple. That's not representative of the entire industry. But what we're finding is that undercover investigation after undercover investigation is routinely uncovering abuses that demonstrate that animal cruelty is standard practice.
The worst industries are the chicken flesh industry, the fish industry, and the egg industry. The suffering of the chicken industry and the egg industry and the fishing industry, especially aquaculture, is really beyond pretty much anybody's worst imaginings.
You look down in there and it's like a gravy that's simmering and squirming.
Chickens are the most abused land animal on Earth. Of the 10 billion land animals we kill in the U.S. for food every year, 9 billion are chickens, and they have virtually no legal protections. They are even exempt from the Humane Slaughter Act. Whether raised for eggs or meat, animal agriculture deprives them of the most basic joys of being alive and denies them all natural behaviors, including seeing the light of day. In January of 2019, an industrial chicken farm in Colorado went bankrupt. They turned off the heat and stopped feeding the 40,000 birds in their care. Local sanctuaries found out and put out a call for help. They pulled as many birds as they could find homes for. In total, over 600 were rescued by brave, compassionate activists and then transported to sanctuaries across the country. I happened to see what was going on Facebook and decided to convert my old shed into a makeshift coop, which was the beginning of my own sanctuary.
So I'd been vegan for about 15 years before I first took in any chickens. And until then, I knew about the horrible suffering that they endure. That's part of why I went vegan to begin with. But even as a 15-year vegan, I still believed many of the convenient misconceptions society tells us about the species. I think I believed they were probably kind of stupid. I think I hoped they were too stupid to suffer somehow. And I also don't think I realized they were really capable of having individual personalities. And just like on a daily basis, I'm astounded and charmed by their amazing little personalities. They're all unique. Some of them like to be snuggled and held. Some of them will come just begging for attention. Leela and Mitra like to jump on your shoulder. Fanny likes to be held and snuggled. Eleanor likes to be held and snuggled. Becky was one of the original Colorado rescues. She got to me with a compound fracture and had to have her wing amputated. And she spent the nights in the house for about a year. And so she'd go outside during the day in her own separate yard, and then she'd come in at night. And she knew the routine so well. As soon as you opened up the door to her enclosure, she would run up the back stairs of the porch and go in the house and run back to her bedroom and put herself in her little kennel.
They're all individuals, just like our dogs and cats. But as a species, they are just incredibly social, gentle, curious, smart. I had no idea what amazing little people they were. I think most people don't.
So I don't want to make light of the cruelty of the beef industry. The animals are branded without pain relief, just third-degree burns. It's excruciating. They'll have their horns ripped out of their heads, castrated without pain relief. And castrated is a pretty antiseptic term, right? Their testicles are ripped out of their scrotums without pain relief. Slaughter is excruciating. The trip to slaughter is excruciating. But all of that, all of it would warrant felony cruelty charges if these were dogs or cats. All of that is still significantly less than the unmitigated misery that categorizes the life of a farmed fish or a farmed broiler chicken or a farmed egg-laying hen. Those three animals are in chronic and excruciating pain for their entire lives. And the slaughter of those animals is even worse than the slaughter of cattle and pigs. So if people stop eating red meat and they substitute birds and fish, from an animal protection standpoint, that is literally exponentially worse. It's not just worse, it's exponentially worse.
I think the dairy and egg industry creates more suffering for the animals than even the meat industry. With cows especially, they are so bonded to their babies, and that's why I think the dairy industry is one of the absolute worst, because the mother cows don't get to be with their babies at all, just for a few minutes, and then they're taken away always because they want all the milk to go to humans. And when we were in school and I was learning, I took a dairy management class, and they told us that the babies have to be taken away immediately because otherwise the mothers will break down the barns to get to their babies, because the bonding is so intense between a mother cow and her baby.
These are cows who have been artificially inseminated, and they are lactating as mammals, just like we are. They're lactating in order to feed their young. But because this is an industry where we want that milk to sell to humans, these babies are taken away, usually on their very first day of being born. When the babies are taken away, they're sent to another facility, and undercover footage of these animals shows that they are tortured and abused, just like all the other animals on factory farms. These are babies, day old, maybe 2 or 3 days old. They can barely even walk. And we investigated a facility that was picking up these cows from dairy factory farms and putting them on what they called a temporary calf raising facility, where they were loaded on the trucks from the dairy factory farm and then unloaded into this temporary facility before they were then loaded back onto a truck and shipped somewhere else. And in this facility, the footage is so disturbing to watch and so heartbreaking, because these are babies who can barely walk, and in order to get them off the trucks, because they can't walk, the workers are seen pulling them by their legs, by their tails, kicking them off of the trucks, dragging them around the facilities, and then they'll spend about a week there, and they're still very fragile. These are such sensitive, fragile animals. They can still barely walk, and in order to load them on the truck as fast as they want to, they will often pick them up and throw them onto the trucks on top of each other. In some of the cases, they didn't even land on the truck and they fell in front of the truck, and they're treating them like you would treat garbage. I mean, they are literally just treating them like these are not sentient beings, but these are baby cows. These are calves who want nothing more than to be with their mothers.
I've always been somebody who was really motivated to fight for those who were more helpless or more vulnerable. I'm very engaged in social justice movements, from the anti-racism movements to LGBTQ plus movement to the disability movement. And so I try to do what I can in sweatshop labor movements, just I want to be supportive and be a part of the solution to those issues, and have for years. And so finally seeing what was happening to animals and seeing them as maybe the most vulnerable community, the floodgates opened. And in that moment, I connected. I really connected, and there was no turning back. I saw it everywhere at that moment. Everywhere I looked, I saw animal abuse, animal use, animal exploitation, and it hit me from all these different directions. And I thought, I have to do something. I'm fighting for marginalized groups, period.
So you have that dominant society that's always been there. And so we're just trying to take a small part of it by looking at food as a tool to help create social change and a more positive change in the world. Food justice is every aspect of the food supply chain. So, and not causing harm to any sentient being. It also includes the disbursement of food, the equity of food, and who is getting the healthy food, and those communities who aren't getting the healthy food. So it's really just taking a holistic view at the food system as it currently exists, and really trying to right some of the wrongs and really honestly break down a system that's made of exploitation and oppression of living beings. When we look at the food system and animal agriculture, we look at the corporations who are basically fueling all of this. That they look at all beings, whether it be human or non-human animals, as commodities, as an ends to a means.
When I am fighting for them, I'm fighting the injustice that is happening to them.
The workers are exploited as well. Some do die in these systems, but more than not, we're talking about people of color, a lot who are immigrants, who are victims, women who are victims of sexual harassment and worse. As well as workers who are threatened with things like deportation, who, when they speak out against abuses that are taking place, are threatened.
The environmental justice issues, a lot of the ones that are related to agribusiness are happening far away, are happening out, in the middle of nowhere where people are living out in the country, and these facilities are being built and polluting communities, predominantly communities of color, poor communities of color, and so they're having all these upper respiratory problems, they're having, cancers that weren't prevalent before, and so it does become an environmental justice issue because these communities are clearly being targeted.
I absolutely believe that veganism is necessary for a just society. I think that veganism is a start. I definitely think we need to widen our circle of compassion for those of us who are vegans. We always want human animals to extend that circle of compassion to recognize non-human animals, which I absolutely agree with. But we as vegans and animal activists need to understand that we too need to expand that circle of compassion to include human animals.
Fundamentally, sitting behind it all, there is a structure that holds certain types of beings over others, and they become the oppressors, and then there's the oppressed.
We think that we as humans are entitled to not only rule the planet, but to exploit it. Look at the result of that. We are on the verge of ecological collapse.
Animal agriculture is a significant contributor to global climate change. So anywhere from between 14.5% to perhaps 18%, maybe even slightly more of global greenhouse gas emissions caused by human activity are directly attributable to the livestock sector. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization came out with this very seminal report called Livestock's Long Shadow in 2006. And that really set a very strong research agenda basis. And their conclusion was, the livestock sector is closely linked to the most pressing environmental problems throughout the world, from water pollution to deforestation to climate change. And it needs to be addressed in that framework. It can't be a side issue, it needs to be a central aspect of public policy.
And when you're talking about climate change, the people that get hit worst are usually the most vulnerable. And so it's coastal cities and countries and near the equator, and then also just vulnerable populations don't have backup safety systems.
The realities of climate change are a huge issue around, or a huge set of issues, but principally around justice and equity. Climate change has been caused by the rich nations of the world, but in historically what we called the global north. It's not fair for us to say in the global north, well, we destroyed our forests, we polluted the atmosphere with fossil fuels, we destroyed a lot of agricultural land, and now you people in India, in China, in Brazil, in Paraguay, in Papua New Guinea, you really can't do it because there's not enough climate space, there's not enough resources.
The emergence of factory farm actually really push meat consumption to a much higher level, because meat has never been so cheap in human history. And that is also one thing that most people never thought of, is why and how can meat be so cheap? I mean, if you think about it, after all, meat used to be life. So the question is, how could life be so cheap?
We can continue on this path we're on, a path of greed, selfishness, indifference, xenophobia, racism, sexism, ableism, heterosexism, misogyny, environmental destruction, and speciesism, a path that is leading to the destruction of our civilization and ultimately the destruction of our truly miraculous, life-giving planet. Or we can wake up from the delusion of separation and superiority that imprisons us in our own small world and cuts us off from the whole of life of which we are an integral part. We can learn to live with awareness and in harmony with the truth of our interconnection with all life. We can choose compassion and fairness, equality, kindness, and justice. We can choose peace. Our survival now depends on our willingness and ability to see that we are all connected and that all of the problems we face as a world are connected. We must look deeply to see the root causes of suffering, to see that the way that we treat all beings, especially the most vulnerable, matters. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, until all are free, none are free.
It's a big challenge to see the world as one, and again, not only to think of the human species.
I grew up in the projects, and I never saw animals, except for the animals that we're at odds with. You know, I saw rats, you know, I saw insects, I saw the occasional sparrow and maybe a squirrel every once in a while, but it was concrete, it was asphalt, it was bricks everywhere, and these aren't really environments that are conducive to wildlife, to nature. I didn't see forests, I didn't see streams, I didn't see any of that, and growing up that way, you don't have a connection just to the actual planet that we live on. I thought that the environment was somewhere else. When I grew up, you know, and I would hear this word environment, honestly, I thought that it was somewhere where like white people went to like be in the woods and I don't know, like fish and shoot animals. You know, like this is what I thought the environment was. I didn't know that I was actually living in an environment. One of my goals is to help to reconnect people to the planet itself by just having your hands in the earth. You know, we adopted these abandoned lots and we put gardens on them, and then we invite the community to come out and just put your hands in the dirt. The kids just took to it and they just wanted to be involved, and you know, they saw a praying mantis for the first time and they were like, oh my gosh, like this is an amazing insect, and they all wanted to like, you know, come over and see the praying mantis. They, you know, some of them saw slugs for the first time, or worms for the first time, or, you know, a butterfly. Because butterflies don't really come into the hood. There's nothing green, you know? And because we were building this environment, these animals were suddenly coming into the environment, and these children were seeing these animals for the first time, and they were amazed and they were excited, and then I was able to connect them back to the natural world, which they had never, for some of them, had never had before.
given that animals are sentient, how might that affect our relations with them? Well, just some fundamental ways. We need to respect them, and that means to give them their space. We need to allow them to live normal lives. We need to stop caging them. We really, in my view, we need to stop shipping them to slaughter. We need to get rid of factory farms, because about 98% of all the animals we kill are to be eaten. So dietary shifts are where it's at. That's the biggest and most significant, impactful change that humans as individuals need to make to help animals and the planet and ultimately ourselves.
Family farms are just a smaller version of a factory farm. All the same things are done. The animals are still killed when they're babies. A lot of the chickens are still debeaked. They still do a lot of the same awful practices, just on a smaller scale.
I work with all of these animals, and I see them as individuals because they are individuals. We've learned to see them not as some abstract notion of a species, but we meet them and we learn to recognize them as individuals. When I see Vegan and Valentine, our Yorkshire pigs, and I see how they move and how funny and intelligent and amazing they are, I think about all of those pigs that live miserable lives in those gestation crates.
The highest calling of all religion is nonviolence. And I think that's true of secular humanism as well. Pretty much we can all agree that if we have two choices in front of us, and one of them is add to the level of mercy in the world, and one of them is add to the level of misery in the world, it's pretty basic to ethics and basic to religion that we go with mercy. You know, compassion or cruelty, we go with compassion. Like, that's what it means to be an ethical human being in the world, regardless of one's faith background.
We all have the same fundamental essence, and that fundamental essence is enlightened. That fundamental essence is loving, it's kind, it's compassionate.
So then you apply that sort of basic understanding to what it is that we choose to eat, and you get into this situation where most people just haven't thought that much about it. But really, a vegan diet is the diet that aligns with the values that just about everybody already has the values. It's just applying those values to our daily life.
How do I feel about the future and my hopes for the future? Well, if I'm honest, I try not to. Because as an activist, I have a very immediate goal, and it's to do what I can do today. My life is so short, and ultimately, the only meaning my life can have is a change that I bring here, is how I touch others, how I touch the earth that I walk on.
I am very concerned about the future. I'm afraid that we're not going to learn our lessons quick enough. We're running out of time.
Cultural change happens really quickly, and I think we're approaching a tipping point, and frankly, climate change is part of that tipping point. It may be the very issue that brings us to our senses or possibly to our knees, so that we realize we just can't run roughshod over the planet anymore. We need a new paradigm, and that may be the best thing to happen for the animals.
I don't think we have a future if our future is not vegan.
It's important for people to recognize the power of their food choices, and that informed food choices can really do a lot to help change the wrongs in our society. What we say, of course, is eat your ethics.
When we have the compassion a lot in our hearts, we can embrace everything.
We can create a world that is fair and just, a world where all beings are treated with respect and kindness, where we can all be free to pursue our own unique purpose. We can save our world.
Hey, sweetheart.
Albert Einstein once said, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty."
Thank you.